Support for Consider This is provided by the University of Nebraska at Omaha College of Communication, Fine Arts, and Media.
Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, Nebraska 150 celebration. Joining us to talk more about it are Reagan Anson, Executive Director, Sarah Crook, Chair of the Nebraska Sesquicentennial Commission and Professor of History at Peru State College, and Donna Cush, Nebraska Sesquicentennial Commissioner and Vice President of Public Affairs Northern Region at Union Pacific Railroad. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Mm-hmm. So Reagan, I'm going to start with you, and I have to ask, thoughts as you're watching that opening video?
Well, I mean, it just instills a lot of pride as a Nebraskan to see that video. I don't think anyone could watch it and not feel tremendous pride in our state and be taken away by the beauty of a landscape. It's just gorgeous, and I think it really captures the spirit of our state. And I don't think anyone could watch it and still think that it's really flat either. So it's a great video, and I think really captures what Nebraska is about. Captures the agricultural heritage, and also the commerce that our state has as well. So it's a good blend of who we are. So it's a neat video.
Wow. And Sarah, Nebraska's roots go back to almost the founding of the country, right? 1803, third president purchases Louisiana Territory and hires two men. And I think I'm going to have you take it from there.
Okay. Well, Lewis and Clark, obviously, it was Jefferson's dream to try to find an all-water route to the Pacific because he thought there was some river that went that way. And of course, Lewis and Clark started off on the Missouri from St. Louis and came up the Missouri, which of course forms the eastern boundary of Nebraska. And every time they came to a fork in the river, they had to try to make a determination which one was the mainstream of the main river and which one was a tributary. I often tell my students that when they came to the mouth of the Platte, the location of today's Plattsmouth, Nebraska, they quickly dismissed the Platte as being way too shallow, wider in places than maybe the Missouri, but way too shallow, a sandy bottom, not the muddy mow that we know. And so they dismissed it as the all-water route to the Pacific, which it's true, it was not the all-water route, but in many ways they missed the boat. Sorry about the pun, but they missed the boat in that the way west was not going to be a water route. The way west was going to be the Platte River Valley and via Conestoga wagons and eventually, of course, the Union Pacific as well. So it's kind of ironic that they dismissed the Platte, which of course will be the way west for the development of the West, not only the Great Plains, but of course the far west as well.
Wow. Okay. And first city. Talk to us about the first city that's founded in our great state.
Well, there's several of them right along the river. Bellevue would be the obvious, and it had been a fur trading site for many years. And there had been other sites up and down the river, but Bellevue does get the site as the first city. And in fact, most people don't know that when the first territorial governor was appointed, his name was Francis Burt, appointed by President Pierce. He was a South Carolinian, which for those of you who know kind of your time period, this is pre-Civil War, so that was an important fact that a South Carolinian, which of course was a slave state, was appointed territorial governor. He does come up the Missouri River via a boat. He gets off at Bellevue, but he's so sick by the time that he gets off that they actually administer the oath of office laying down, and he dies several days later. Bellevue maintains that, of course, that he got off at Bellevue because he meant for that to be the territorial capital, but he died without ever having said so. And so then the territorial secretary became the person who, as acting territorial governor, got to decide the location of the territorial capital. And of course, that was to be what they then called Omaha City, because of course you always wanted to add the word city because that meant that the town would grow into a large metropolis at some point.
Okay. 1840, I'm just fascinated by what you're saying. 1840 Oregon Trail. Tell us it's tied to Chimney Rock.
Okay, well, actually the very first people to realize that the Platte River Valley would make a great route west, because Lewis and Clark did not find an all-water route west, was actually fur trappers coming from the mountains, taking their trappings back to St. Louis as a rendezvous point. I believe it was 1822, Robert Stewart, who first noted in his journal that the Platte River Valley made you could float some of the furs along the Platte, and it just made for a great route. Then it's in the early 1840s, after the Conestoga wagon is invented, that people come up the Missouri River, and they actually had multiple jumping off points along the river. Initially people thought that Omaha City didn't exist yet, that places up along the Platte might be a jumping off point, there by Bellevue and the fur trading trapping place. There was also a point along where today's Nebraska City is. That was the Nebraska City cutoff. Eventually, probably the most popular point for jumping off was kind of the St. Joe, Independence, Nebraska, and they cut up through the corner of Kansas, hooked onto the Little Blue River, and then came out where the Platte River has its southernmost points, and that would be then where they relocated Fort Kearny, because all jumping off points converged at Fort Kearny. From there, they followed the south side of the Platte River, assuming you're not talking about the Mormons, because they stayed on the north side. And when they got to Chimney Rock, which would be on the North Platte River, that is the point at which they talk about seeing the elephant. And that was such a unique physical mark on the landscape, which to that point had been fairly flat. Hence, again, the Platte River Valley, flat was good. But when they saw Chimney Rock, they knew that the topography was about to change. They knew that they had probably crossed the easiest part thus far. And so seeing the elephant meant at this point, if you weren't sure you wanted to go on, this was your last chance to turn back.
Okay, 1850, abolitionist John Brown, Underground Railways. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it really starts with the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And they started debating that act in 1844, and it originally was called a bill for the creation of the Nebraska Territory. It eventually became the bill to create the Nebraska and Kansas territories. So although we call it the Kansas-Nebraska Act, I'm trying to get Nebraskans to call it the Nebraska-Kansas Act, because that should be the real name, because we were the original name associated with the region. But then they came up with the idea that they split into two territories, the Kansas Territory and the Nebraska Territory, and the big issue was the railroad and slavery. And so when that act was passed in 1854, people like John Brown, who was a staunch abolitionist, ramped up their efforts for the Underground Railroad, because now That area that had been claimed by the Missouri Compromise to be forever free was now open to slavery by a vote of popular sovereignty of each territory. And that's what invigorated the abolitionists, because now forever, Missouri Compromise 1820, obviously only lasted 34 years, because the Kansas-Nebraska Act said, no, now we're going to let the people decide. And it was a political move by Senator Douglas, who had thoughts of running not only again for U.S. Senate, but he was hoping for a presidential bid down the road. And how more democratic can you get than to let the people to decide? And so hence the popular sovereignty. He also wanted 2 territorial capitals, and Donna might be able to talk a little more about this. He wanted 2 territorial capitals because he wanted one of them to be west of Chicago, which was his hometown, which was not a large town at that time, because he was hoping that Chicago, rather than St. Louis, would become the hub for the Transcontinental Railroad. So politics, railroad, slavery, all were involved in the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And for those of us who study the Kansas-Nebraska Act, it really is kind of the final last attempt at a compromise that will lead directly to the Civil War. And at that point, sides get ingrained. You have bleeding Kansas. There were episodes in Nebraska, not so bloody, thank goodness, as Kansas, but it was an issue that really forced the Civil War in many ways. And so a very important part of American history was the creation of the Nebraska Territory.
Okay, so we go now forward to 1862. We're going to talk about a few things here, starting with the Homestead Act. And then, Donna, we are going to get to you. Yes.
In 1862, once the South had seceded, Southern states had seceded, Congress was able to pass 3 important pieces of documents that had been stalled by the Southern states. One was the Pacific Railway Act, which would create the Transcontinental Railroad. And Donna will tell you that, in fact, it will go through the Platte River Valley. The other one was the Morrill Land Grant that gave states monies to set up agricultural research centers, ag universities. And the third one was the Homestead Act, which would give away free land if you proved up over a period of five years. And that would be huge for the railroads as well, because they will get some land grant money or land grant land, and they then will need settlers to come to the area to buy that land and to use the railway. So those are all tied very closely together. But the important point there, from a historian point of view, is that that couldn't get passed while those southern states were still in the U.S. Senate to block it. But as soon as they seceded, all 3 of those acts were passed in 1862.
Wow. And Donna, what about from your perspective then, maybe piggybacking on to what Sarah has described?
Yeah, so Pacific Railway Act was really the vision of President Abraham Lincoln, who at UP we like to refer to as our founding father, because he basically had the vision to say, I would like, a transcontinental railroad starting, somewhere near Omaha, Council Bluffs, and then also continuing on to the West Coast. So with the passage of the Pacific Railway Act, he created, therefore, Union Pacific, and then also what it mainly did, though, was, initiated the start of the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, starting in the West here in Omaha, which is why Union Pacific's headquarters are actually here, and then starting with Central Pacific on the West Coast in California near Sacramento, and then each of the railroads basically were in a race to build as much railroad as possible, connecting then in Promontory, Utah, eventually with the Golden Spike. So the actual construction didn't start for a couple more years. So President Lincoln was assassinated before the construction actually starts. So he never actually even got to see the start of the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. It started a couple years later and then finally completed in 1869, again at Promontory, Utah with the Golden Spike.
Okay, thank you. And just a couple years prior to that, 1867, Sarah, March 1st, big deal.
We are the first state that is admitted after the Civil War, and it did get embroiled in some of those post-Civil War issues. Probably one of my favorite stories to tell is that Nebraska, when it passed its constitution and sent it to Congress to be admitted, that was 1866. Congress sent it back because the one feature that was in our Constitution, because we basically had just adopted Iowa's Constitution, because again, they were just trying to get something on the books and make it happen, because there had been some earlier discussions of statehood, and they had always been defeated. The issue was that our original Constitution did not give black men the right to vote. And the Senate had already proposed the 15th Amendment, but it hadn't been ratified. And so Congress basically said to Nebraska, we want you to include black suffrage in your Constitution as a requirement for admittance to a state. Nebraska didn't have a problem with that. Again, like I said, they had basically just adopted Iowa's Constitution, and they're like, yeah, no problem. So they made that change, sent it back, Congress approved. President Andrew Johnson vetoed it. Not because he had anything against Nebraska, not because he had anything against black suffrage. He just felt it was unconstitutional of Congress to tell Nebraska that more or less they had to pre-ratify the 15th Amendment to be admitted as a state, which will then set the pattern for southern states being readmitted after the war is over. So it became a political fight, and Nebraska was kind of the football that got tossed around in the episode. But as a result, we are the first state admitted after the Civil War.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to kind of close out our history lesson, Sarah. But you have done a phenomenal
Well,
job.
thank you very much.
Really, I can tell you're very passionate about what you do.
I love Nebraska history.
All right, Donna, we're going to change gears and we're going to go to famous people in Nebraska. We've already talked about John Brown a little bit. Who do you consider to be a big deal here in Nebraska, and why do you think so?
I think there's so many people, and in fact, we forget sometimes that some of these famous people actually, were born and raised in Nebraska. So Gerald Ford, being a United States president is one that's obviously very important, I think, to our history. You think about people like Henry Fonda, who did so much, for performing actors and did so much for movies and everything that he starred in. Warren Buffett, obviously, is one of the most more famous current people, probably well known, especially in the financial world and otherwise. And then you have people like Kay Orr, who really was, made history for Nebraska too by being the first female Republican governor. And then, more commonplace again today, you have Hilary Swank was born in Nebraska, Marg Helgenberger, born and raised in Nebraska, so two of my favorite actresses. And there's just, a long list. Johnny Carson is another one that was, born in Norfolk, Nebraska. So there's a long list, and I think, like I said, a lot of times people forget about all of those people.
Yeah, and Reagan, a long list when it comes to movies too.
Yeah.
In researching this program, you kind of forget, oh my goodness, or you didn't really realize. Talk to us about the movies that have been filmed here in Nebraska, a little bit, your favorites.
Yeah, especially recently with producer Alexander Payne, who has such a passion for his home state and for Omaha, he's from Omaha. So he's shot a lot of his movies here. Of course, most recently, one of my favorites, Nebraska, aptly titled, was filmed actually near my hometown of Brunswick, Nebraska, in Plainview, which is where a lot of my family members live. But that was largely filmed in northeast Nebraska and in Plainview quite a bit. A lot of the home scenes were there. And what a cool experience for small town Nebraskans to get a taste of Hollywood, and even the people in Omaha to get a taste of Hollywood and to be part of that process and to meet those actors here at home. And so I really think that's a neat thing that he brings back to his home state. But and I love the movie Election that he also did, filmed here in Omaha. But of course we can't forget Terms of Endearment. I mean, the Academy Award-winning film that was shot here. I think in Lincoln, right? You had an experience with that.
Yeah, but, many years ago.
Yeah, there are a lot of great films that were filmed, in Nebraska. But those are some of my favorites and that come to mind.
Yeah, all of those years in the making, just like the 150 celebration. So you are brought on board as executive director. Yes. Tell us what that's like.
Yeah, well, some days it's overwhelming, but it's great. No, it's great. It's been a year, and so since I came on board, and it's been wonderful. I've just met so many wonderful people, and there's so many people that are really passionate about this state, and I think, if anything, I knew that before. I'm a lifelong Nebraskan, born and raised. I've lived here my whole life, and I've always known the passion that people have for our state, and I too have share that passion. But if anything, I've learned even more how deep that passion runs, and how excited people are to be part of this process and part of this celebration. And this is it's a lot more than just throwing a party. This is really what we're trying to do, is connect people, bridge communities, connect people with one another in deeper ways, and even build an enhanced sense of pride throughout the state. And so it's exciting to be part of that process, and to be working with our commission and with our foundation members, and with the governor and first lady, who are just wonderful. And so I'm really just excited to be part of it, and to be part of this small piece of Nebraska history is really really unique, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Wow. And Sarah, we're talking about official things getting underway in 2017, but broad strokes, if somebody were to come up to you and say, in a nutshell, what are you doing in terms of things and promotions and so forth, how would you respond to that question?
Well, I would say first off that Reagan and her staff have a list of programs that they're seeking funding for that will be statewide. And I will let her speak to those specific programs, but we are hoping that it's a celebration that lasts all year, starting January of 2017 and going through till December of 2017. The commission, through state legislature and legislative statute, are selling sesquicentennial license plates, specialty license plate. And the monies that are raised from that go to the commission, and the commission in turn is awarding those back to entities, organizations, communities, et cetera, who apply, who want to do an event for the sesquicentennial but need a little financial help. So that's one thing you can do right away. You can go buy your sesquicentennial license plate, and in turn those monies will go back to communities. We're not using it for administrative overhead in any ways. It will be returned to the community. So it's not only going to be a celebration where we're going to do it at the state level and it's going to be top down, but we're reaching out into communities and saying, what do you want to do? And right now communities can go on to the Nebraska 150 or any 150, we made it even real simple, any150.org website, and apply for official status. And then at that point they can use our logo, et cetera, and hope that can be helpful to them in terms of publicity and public relations in general. So we're hoping it's a groundswell up, as well as trying to promote some broad overview. And we want it to be statewide, different cultural backgrounds. We want to celebrate all Nebraskans.
Donna, one of the things we know is going to happen kind of ties back to earlier in the program when we were talking about the railways. Tell us about that.
Yes, so one of, I think, our signature events next year is going to be a Nebraska 150 whistle stop tour. And so the governor, first lady, and our CEO and chairman, Lance Fritz, will be traveling from Omaha to the western border of the state, and then making a trip back as well. But what's neat is that, strategically speaking, we're tying that into the Transcontinental Railroad route. I mean, that will be the same route, pretty much, almost exactly. And so that's very exciting for us, because many of those towns that then we will be stopping at to celebrate with are towns that grew up around the railroad and have some great history with us, and celebrating, their history with Nebraska, but also with the railroad and the historical perspective we have there. So it's going to be a great celebration, and as Sarah said, one that we think is really neat because, uniquely so, it really is a celebration from border to border across the state, which was a very important mission for the governor and first lady, that we do make sure we touch everyone across the state.
Wow, UP obviously very instrumental in this. Talk about the organization's involvement in something as impactful as this 150 celebration, Donna.
Oh, it is. It is for us. I mean, it's an honor. It's an honor to be on the commission. It's an honor to work with everybody that is on the commission, and just for us at UP, again, being headquartered in Omaha and actually having started there in Omaha, it's one that we feel just a natural connection with, a natural alignment with. Our histories are aligned. We grew up together, the state and the railroad. And so overall, for me personally speaking, it's an honor to be part of it, but also for Union Pacific. It's really just a great partnership for us, and great to celebrate our histories together.
Wow, and Reagan, you're bringing organizations in,
Yeah.
also people. I mean, there's an artist, right, that you are promoting right now. Tell us a little
Right.
bit about him and
Sure.
why that's important right
Sure.
now.
Our foundation is working with an artist named Todd Williams, who's originally from Central City, and they've been working with him for the last couple of years, and with a project called Painting the Legacy. And he's been traveling around Nebraska, and he started this project to paint an original painting of all 93 counties in the state. And by the time he's finished, it'll actually be closer to 125 paintings. Some counties have commissioned more than one because they're so excited about the project. But his work will go on exhibition on March 1 of 2017 at the Nebraska State Historical Society Museum in Lincoln. And that, of course, is Statehood Day, which is our 150th anniversary. And there will be a public grand opening, I believe, that evening of this exhibit. And his work is just beautiful, stunning pieces, and you can see some of his work. We have a link to it from our website. But he's quite an accomplished artist, and it's been a very unique and beautiful project to have on our walls.
In just the minute that we have remaining, how can communities get involved? Talk about the
Absolutely.
steps they can do to reach out to you.
You know, like Sarah was talking a little bit earlier, there's a really simple form on our website that communities, if they have an ongoing event or if they want to plan something special for the 150 next year, they can do that and fill out a really simple form on our website and be designated as an official event of the Nebraska 150. And what we do is lend them our branding, and they can utilize that, and we help promote, publicize on our social media and on our website their events, and it ties them back into the overall celebration. And you know, it's that grassroots effort to really tie the state together and to make everyone part of the celebration, because it is everyone's celebration. We want all Nebraskans to be part of this. It's for everyone in the state, no matter where you're from, small towns, big towns. We have entities as small as the Bayard 4th grade class is planning a birthday party, and they're an official event of the Nebraska 150. So it can be that small, or it can be as big as the Nebraska State Fair, which is also an official event of the Nebraska 150. So we're excited to have all of them on board. You can check out the whole list at ne150.org, and we just encourage everyone to get involved.
Let's put that website up. Thank you for referencing that. We want to go ahead and put that up for our viewers in case people want more information. They'll know to go right here, ne150.org. There's the phone number, so if you want more information, give Reagan and her crew a quick call. Reagan, we have just seconds left. If we remember nothing else, what should we remember?
Be part of the party. Be part of the celebration, and it's for everybody. And this is about connecting with each other. And we're excited about it, and we hope you all are too.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for being here.
you.
Best wishes with the year to come.
Thank you.
You bet. And thank you all for watching. We will see you next week. Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or email us at considerthis@tvmail.unomaha.edu.